And just who the hell are you supposed to be, ma'am? Major Kalin Vance's voice sliced through the Joint Operations Center like a blade through silk. The polished concrete floor seemed to amplify his condescension, carrying it to every corner of the cavernous room. Around him, uniformed personnel, Army Rangers, Air Force PJs, Marine Recon, collectively held their breath. Their nervous laughter died in their throats as they turned to watch the confrontation unfold. Vance stood rigid, his crisp uniform a testament to his unwavering belief in regulations and hierarchy. His target was a woman who embodied everything he didn't understand. She stood near the central holographic map in sterile gray fatigues, bearing no rank, no unit patch, no name tape. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, functional knot. Her face, devoid of makeup, remained calm and placid. She looked less like a military operator and more like someone who had wandered in from a university library. She held a datapad, her thumb tracing idle patterns across its dark surface. Her focus seemed a million miles away from the Major's public dressing down. She didn't flinch, she didn't scowl, she didn't even acknowledge his presence, her pale gray eyes fixed on the swirling tactical display before her. This profound stillness was more infuriating to Vance than any retort could have been. But across the room, a 4-star general watched her stance with narrowed eyes. He noticed the subtle, perfect balance, the relaxed shoulders paired with ready hands. Something flickered across his weathered face. Not anger, but recognition. Impossible recognition. Vance was a product of a system that valued the visible and quantifiable. Medals on a chest, stripes on a sleeve, thunder in a voice. This woman was a creature of the unseen, a ghost whose value was measured not in accolades, but in outcomes. Quiet victories won in shadows long before men like Vance knew there was a battle. The onlookers felt a primal discomfort. They knew Vance was an arrogant blowhard, but he was their arrogant blowhard. He was part of the tribe. This woman was an anomaly, an error in the code of their rigid world. Her quiet defiance felt like a challenge to the very order of things. The general, however, saw something else entirely. He saw a weapon patiently waiting for a target. Emboldened by her silence, which he mistook for submission, Vance pressed his attack. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a theatrical, patronizing tone. "Look, ma'am," he began, playing to his audience. "This is a Tier 1 operational environment. We have protocols. We have procedures. We have a chain of command. Every single person in this room, from that airman running diagnostics to General Morrison himself, reports to someone. So for the last time, I need to know who you are and who you answer to. Is that understood?" He punctuated the last 2 words with sharp, violent clarity. The room fell silent enough to hear the hum of servers and the whisper of ventilation. It was a silence filled with 1,000 unasked questions. Who was she? Why was she here? And why was General Morrison allowing this to continue? The woman finally lifted her head. Her pale gray eyes met the Major's for the first time. There was no anger in them, no fear, only a profound, bottomless weariness, the look of a master craftsman being questioned by a clueless apprentice. She took a slow, deliberate breath. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a strange resonance that cut through the sterile air with absolute finality. "Major," she said, her tone flat and technical, "you asked for my chain of command." She paused, letting every single person lean in. They all answered to me. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, subscribe to The Final Watch. The statement was so audacious, so utterly contrary to the established reality, that it created a vacuum. For a full second, the collective mind of the Joint Operations Center simply could not process it. Then came nervous snickers, quickly suppressed. Major Vance's face contorted from smug authority into pure, unadulterated disbelief. His mouth opened and closed silently. He looked around the room seeking validation, seeking someone to share in the absurdity of her claim. He found none. The woman had not raised her voice. She had not postured. She had simply stated a fact as one might state that water is wet. It was the sheer, unadorned confidence of her delivery that was so disarming. This wasn't arrogance. It was something older and far more dangerous. Certainty. Vance recovered his voice, sputtering. That's the most ridiculous, insubordinate thing I've ever heard. You'll show some respect for the rank in this room." He pointed a trembling finger at his own chest, then swept it around to encompass the other officers. But the gesture lacked its earlier conviction. A crack had appeared in his armor of self-importance. The woman simply turned her attention back to the holographic map, where red icons representing enemy positions were swarming a critical outpost designated Strongpoint Kestrel. A frantic voice from the comm station cut through the drama. "Sir, Kestrel is reporting heavy contact. They're being overwhelmed. We're losing signal. Their comms are being jammed by complex, multi-layered encryption. NSA says they've never seen anything like it. They're blind, sir. Completely blind." Controlled panic rippled through the room. Analysts began typing furiously, faces illuminated by cascading green code. Voices called out in a frantic symphony of failure. "No effect on the jammer, sir. We're throwing everything we have at it. SIGINT can't get a lock. The signal is ghosting, hopping frequencies faster than we can track. Predator drone is overhead, but its data link is corrupted. We're getting garbage." Major Vance, his personal conflict momentarily forgotten, snapped into professional mode. "Give me a solution now. I want every cyber warfare specialist we have focused on that encryption. Break it." But his orders were met with a chorus of negatives. The digital fortress around Strongpoint Kestrel was impenetrable. The best minds and most advanced technology of the United States military were being defeated by an invisible wall of code. The men and women at Kestrel were on their own, their desperate calls swallowed by an electronic abyss. Amidst the rising chaos, the woman in gray remained an island of impossible calm. She set her datapad down with a soft click. She didn't hurry, she didn't run. She walked with slow, deliberate purpose to an unused communications terminal in the corner. Her movements were fluid and economical, each step placed with the quiet purpose of a predator closing in on prey. She slid into the chair, back straight, posture perfect. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. In that moment, the entire jock seemed to hold its breath once more. The frantic shouting died down, replaced by tense, expectant silence. They were all watching her now. Major Vance stood frozen, his face a mixture of fury and dawning, terrifying suspicion. General Morrison watched with an unreadable expression, hands clasped behind his back. The woman's fingers descended. The only sound in the world was the soft, rhythmic clicking of keys, like rain beginning to fall before a storm. The clicking wasn't the frantic assault of a desperate coder. It was measured, almost melodic, the sound of a musician playing a familiar piece. Her eyes weren't fixed on the main screen, where impenetrable code scrolled past in waterfalls of failure. They were focused on her own small monitor, her gaze distant, as if reading not the characters on screen, but the deeper language hidden behind them. She wasn't fighting the encryption, she was conversing with it. The analysts at the main cyber warfare station watched their brute force protocols being contemptuously repelled. They were trying to break the lock. The woman in gray was looking for the key. She typed a short string of commands, then paused, head tilted slightly. She closed her eyes for a full 10 seconds, a statue of concentration in the heart of the storm. Major Vance, unable to contain himself, took a step forward. What is she doing? Is she authorized to be on that terminal? Before anyone could answer, General Morrison's voice, quiet but carrying undisputed command, cut across the room. "Let her work, Major." The words landed like a physical blow, freezing Vance in place. He snapped his mouth shut, face flushing with humiliation and rage. He was being overruled, his authority casually dismissed in favor of a nameless, rankless civilian who, for all he knew, was playing solitaire while his men died. The woman's eyes opened. A single line of code appeared on her screen, elegant in its simplicity. It wasn't a command to attack. It looked more like a question, a philosophical inquiry posed in the language of machines. She hit enter. On the main screen, a flicker. A single line in the enemy's scrolling defense code wavered as if a stone had been dropped into a still pond. The lead NSA analyst gasped. "Sir, look at that. It's a recursive algorithm, but it's referencing a pre-Socratic linguistic paradox. That's not code, that's a logic puzzle." The woman typed again, another short, elegant string of characters. This time, the response was more pronounced. A whole block of enemy encryption shuddered, destabilizing. It was like watching a master safecracker gently teasing the tumblers of an impossible lock, feeling for subtle clicks and shifts no machine could detect. She wasn't using processing power, she was using wisdom, She had recognized the mind of the person who built the wall, and she was speaking directly to him, bypassing his machine and engaging the man. She was dismantling his logic piece by piece, using the creator's own arrogance and intellectual vanity against him. A third line, a fourth. With each entry, larger chunks of the enemy's digital defense sloughed away, revealing raw communication data beneath. The room was transfixed. The symphony of panic had been replaced by awed whispers. How is she doing that? That's not in any textbook. It's like she's negotiating with it. Finally, with one last soft keystroke, the entire wall of encryption vanished. It didn't shatter, it simply dissolved like sugar in water. The main screen, which had been a chaotic mess of scrolling red text, suddenly cleared. In its place appeared a crisp, clear satellite feed of Strongpoint Kestrel, and with it, sound. The desperate, terrified voice of the captain on the ground filled the JOC. 6, this is Kestrel Actual. Does anyone read me? We are being overrun. I repeat, we are being overrun. We need... The woman in gray reached over to a secondary panel and flipped a switch. Her voice, calm and clear, went out over the command channel. Kestrel Actual, this is Archangel. We read you. Stand by for fire solution. She turned her chair and looked directly at the tactical officer. He has a laser designator. Tell him to paint the northern ridge. AC-130, call sign Spectre. Time on target is 90 seconds. The jock exploded into purposeful action. The rudderless panic was gone, replaced by sharp efficiency. The tactical officer stared at the woman for half a second, eyes wide with disbelief, before training kicked in. Kestrel Actual, this is Jock. Do you copy? You have Spectre on station. Paint the northern ridge over. The desperate voice from the ground, now surging with hope, came back instantly. Copy, Jock. Painting now. God, you have no idea. His voice was cut off by renewed gunfire. On screen, they could see tiny figures scrambling for cover as a massive wave of enemy fighters poured over the ridgeline, a tidal wave of men about to crash down and annihilate the small outpost. Spectre is inbound, the woman stated, voice perfectly level. She monitored the drone feed, eyes tracking infrared signatures of the enemy assault force. Major Vance, she said, without turning to look at him. The major flinched as if struck. Yes, he managed, voice small and weak. Get your medevac bird spooled up, they'll have casualties. It was an order. There was no mistaking it. Not a suggestion, not a request. A direct command from someone with absolute certainty of the next 5 minutes. Vance, to his own astonishment, found himself nodding. Yes, ma'am. He turned and began barking orders, voice regaining some familiar thunder, but the foundation of his world had been shaken to its core. The room watched the main screen, captivated. A new sound filtered through the comms, a low, deep thrumming that grew into a menacing roar. The AC-130 Spectre gunship, the Angel of Death, arriving on station. Spectre has visual on the Sparkle, the pilot's calm voice announced. Target confirmed. Jock, we are cleared hot. General Morrison's voice answered, tight and controlled. You are cleared hot, Spectre. Prosecute at will. The result was biblical. The screen flashed white as the Spectre's 105mm cannon fired. A section of the northern ridge simply ceased to exist, replaced by fire and earth. The disciplined lines of attackers dissolved into chaos. The gunship began to circle, a patient predator high above the battlefield. Its smaller cannons opened up with a sound like a giant tearing canvas, and the ground below was shredded in a storm of high explosive shells. The wave of attackers was broken, shattered, annihilated. In less than 2 minutes, the assault was over. Survivors fled back into darkness, relentlessly pursued by Spectre's infrared sights. Profound silence fell over the jock once more, but this time it wasn't tension or confusion. It was awe. They had been on the brink of losing dozens of men, of suffering catastrophic defeat, and this one quiet, unassuming woman had single-handedly turned the tide. She had done what the combined technological might of the U.S. military could not. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape of wheels sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet room. She stood, her part in the drama seemingly over. She picked up her datapad and turned to leave, expression as placid and unreadable as when Major Vance had first confronted her. She had saved an entire company, broken an unbreakable code, and directed one of the most lethal air assets in the world, and showed no more emotion than if she'd just finished filing a report. As she walked towards the exit, the sea of uniforms parted before her. They looked at her not as an outsider, but as something other, something they couldn't comprehend. As she reached the blast door, General Morrison's voice stopped her. "Ma'am." She paused, hand on the door panel, but didn't turn around. "I believe Major Vance had a question for you," the general continued, voice calm but edged with cold steel. "He wasn't letting this go. The lesson wasn't yet complete. He seemed concerned about your authorization and your chain of command." The entire room focused on the three of them, the quiet woman, the humbled major, and the commanding general acting as both judge and jury. Major Vance looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was pale, his earlier bluster completely gone, replaced by rigid, terrified posture. He knew he stood on the edge of a career-ending precipice. He had publicly and arrogantly challenged someone who had just demonstrated competence so far beyond his own it was almost supernatural. "Major," Vance started, voice cracking. Morrison cut him off with a slight raise of his hand. "The question was not for me, Major, it was for her." He nodded toward the woman. "I think you owe her the courtesy of asking it again. Properly." The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Vance swallowed hard. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He stopped a respectful 10 feet from the woman, eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am," he said, voice barely a whisper, I apologize for my unprofessional conduct. I was out of line." The woman still didn't turn. She remained a silhouette against the harsh corridor light. After a long moment, she spoke, voice unchanged. "Your apology is noted, Major, but it is not required. You are following protocol. Your assumptions were logical based on the data available to you." The words were a strange sort of absolution, yet offered no comfort. They only deepened Vance's shame. She was pointing out that his entire worldview, his reliance on visible markers of rank and uniform, was the source of his failure. He had been logical and catastrophically wrong. The general wasn't finished. He walked slowly toward the main command console, boots echoing in the silent room. "For the benefit of everyone here," he announced, voice booming with authority, "so that a mistake of this magnitude is never repeated." He tapped commands into the console. The main holographic display flickered and changed. An official-looking personnel file appeared, floating in the center of the JOC. At the top, in stark block letters, DR Aries Thorne. Beneath it, a photograph of the woman standing at the door. The room collectively inhaled. They had a name, but the mystery was only deepening. Major Vance stared at the screen, face ashen. He had been dressing down a doctor, a civilian. It was worse than he could have imagined. But the general was just getting started. He swiped his hand, and the file scrolled down. It wasn't a standard military file. It was something else. Its template stark and minimalist, bearing the seal of an agency most people had only heard of in hushed, speculative whispers. There was no rank listed next to her name. The field was simply filled with a single chilling word: Director. The silence deepened, becoming a heavy physical presence. Director of what? The question hung unspoken in every mind. General Morrison let the weight of that word settle before continuing. He swiped again. A new section scrolled into view under the heading Specializations. The list was staggering. Cognitive cryptanalysis, ethnolinguistics, ancient and emergent dialects, predictive behavioral modeling, nonlinear strategic theory. Each entry was more esoteric and impressive than the last. These weren't the skills of a soldier. They were the skills of a prophet, a scholar, a grandmaster of a game they were all just beginning to understand. The young NSA analyst who'd first identified her methods stared at the screen, mouth agape. He was looking at the resume of his discipline's patron saint, a living legend he never knew existed. Unit, the general read aloud, voice resonating with profound reverence. He was no longer just a commander. He was an acolyte introducing the uninitiated to a higher power. Project Chimera, a joint intelligence directorate so classified that its existence is denied at levels far above my own pay grade. A ripple of shock went through the room. They were standing in the presence of a true ghost, a member of an organization that officially did not exist. The gray, unmarked fatigues suddenly made sense. They were a uniform of invisibility. Major Vance felt cold dread creep up his spine. He hadn't just insulted a civilian contractor. He had publicly humiliated the director of a clandestine organization operating in the deepest shadows of national security. The general swiped a final time, bringing up the last, most crucial piece of information. The section was titled Chain of Command and Operational Authority. The text beneath was short, but its implications were vast and terrifying. Director Thorne operates under the direct authority of the National Security Council. In matters pertaining to her designated field of expertise, her authority is absolute and supersedes that of any and all theater commanders. The room was utterly still. Every person reread that final sentence, letting the full weight crush them. Supersedes any and all theater commanders. That included General Morrison himself. The woman's earlier statement, the one that sounded so arrogant, "They all answer to me," was not a boast. It was a simple, literal statement of fact. In that room, on that crisis, she was the highest authority. She answered to no one present, because in her domain, they all, from the lowest airman to the 4-star general, answered to her. General Morrison turned away from the screen and faced his people. His eyes found Major Vance, filled not with anger, but with deep, profound disappointment. "Major," he said quietly, "you asked for her chain of command. You have your answer. Dr. Thorne was not just a guest in this JOC. She was not in your way. You were in hers." He then turned his body fully toward the door, toward Dr. Thorne, and in a gesture that stunned the entire room into breathlessness, he drew himself up to his full height and rendered a slow, perfect, formal salute. It was a gesture of immense, unprecedented respect. A 4-star general saluting an unarmed, unranked civilian. It was a violation of every protocol Vance had ever known, and yet it was the most correct and necessary action he had ever witnessed. The sight acted as a powerful catalyst. One by one, then in small groups, then, as a single, unified body, every other person in the Joint Operations Center followed his lead. The room filled with the soft rustle of starched fabric as dozens of hands were raised to foreheads in a silent, collective gesture of apology, deference, and profound respect. They were saluting not a rank, not a uniform, but a level of competence so pure and undeniable that it transcended the need for either. They were saluting the mind that had saved their comrades, the calm that had steadied their panic, the authority that had been earned not by decree but by demonstration. Major Kalin Vance was the last to move. His arm felt impossibly heavy. To raise it would be to admit the totality of his failure, the complete bankruptcy of his judgment. It would be the death of the arrogant, by-the-book officer he had always been. With a shuddering breath that felt like final surrender, he raised his hand. His salute was shaky, imperfect, but it was the most honest gesture he had ever made in his life. Dr. Eris Thorne held her position at the door for a long moment, receiving the silent tribute. She didn't seem pleased or proud or vindicated. Her expression remained one of neutral professional assessment. Finally, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a return of the salute, but an acknowledgement, a closing of the file. Then she turned and disappeared into the corridor, the blast door hissing shut behind her, leaving behind a room full of changed men and women and a silence thick with the echoes of a legend being born. The story of what happened in the JOC that night spread not like wildfire, but like a slow, penetrating current. It wasn't shouted in mess halls or gossiped about in barracks. It was spoken of in quiet, reverent tones between trusted colleagues, shared by grizzled NCOs as a teaching point to young, cocky lieutenants. It became known simply as the Archangel Incident. The tale was stripped of classified details, but its core truth remained. It became a parable about the dangers of assumption and the true nature of authority. Major Vance was not disciplined. He was not transferred. General Morrison, in an act of profound wisdom, knew that public shaming would teach nothing. Instead, Vance was left to confront his own failure, a far more potent punishment. He became a quieter man, more observant, more thoughtful. The sharp, condescending edge to his voice was gone, replaced by cautious humility. He spent more time with civilian analysts, with low-ranking technicians, listening to them, truly listening, for the first time. He had learned the hardest lesson of his career, that the most valuable person in the room is often the one you least expect. The terminal where Dr. Thorne had worked her impossible magic was cordoned off. A simple laminated sign was placed on it by an unknown hand. It read, "The Thorne Terminal. Think before you speak." It became an unofficial monument, a physical reminder of the night competence had silenced arrogance. Newcomers to the jock would ask about it, and an older, wiser officer would pull them aside and tell them the story. They would tell them about the quiet woman in gray, about the unbreakable code, and about the 4-star general salute. The lesson was passed on, woven into the very fabric of their operational culture. The legacy extended far beyond that single base. General Morrison made it a point to incorporate the lesson into his leadership philosophy. In briefings and strategy sessions, he would often pose a simple question to his command staff. Who is our Dr. Thorne in this scenario? It was shorthand for asking who possessed the unique, non-obvious skill set that could unlock the problem, regardless of rank or position. The question forced his colonels and majors to look past uniforms and established hierarchies, to seek out the quiet experts, the unassuming specialists, the hidden geniuses within their own ranks. It fostered a new culture of intellectual humility and the understanding that the best idea could come from anywhere, and that true leadership was about finding and empowering that competence, not just enforcing top-down structure. The story became a staple at officer training schools and intelligence academies. It was presented as a case study, not in cyber warfare, but in human dynamics under pressure. Instructors used it to teach the critical importance of cognitive diversity in teams, emphasizing that a group of identical, by-the-book thinkers, no matter how brilliant, could be defeated by a problem requiring a different perspective. Dr. Thorne became a near-mythical figure, the ghost of the jock. Most believed she wasn't even a real person, but a composite character created for training. It was better that way. It allowed her to become a pure symbol, an archetype of the quiet professional whose worth was defined not by who they were, but by what they could do. Major Vance, years later and now a lieutenant colonel, became one of the most effective and respected officers in his field. His transformation was total. He became a mentor to young officers, and his favorite piece of advice was always the same. Look for the quiet ones, he would say, eyes distant with memory. Arrogance is a megaphone. It broadcasts its presence to the world. Competence is a dog whistle. It's silent to most, but the people who matter can hear it. Your job as a leader is to learn how to listen for the whistle, not just the megaphone. He never spoke of the incident in detail, never confessed his own role as the antagonist. He didn't have to. The lesson was etched into his very being, and he lived it every day. He honored Dr. Thorne, not with words of apology, but by becoming a living embodiment of the lesson she had taught him. He made sure no other quiet professional would ever have to endure the kind of ignorant prejudice he had shown, at least not in any command that he led. He had learned that respect was not about saluting the rank. It was about recognizing the skill. Years passed. The conflict shifted. Technologies evolved. The faces in the jock changed. But the story endured. It became a foundational myth, part of the institutional memory. A new generation of soldiers, analysts, and officers worked under the shadow of that legend, their perspectives subtly shaped by a single night of quiet, decisive action. The Thorne Terminal remained. Its sign faded, but its message as potent as ever. It was a pilgrimage site for new analysts, a place to stand for a moment and reflect on the true nature of their work. They were guardians of information, wielders of knowledge, and their power lay not in volume but in precision, not in authority but in accuracy. The story taught them that their value was intrinsic, independent of the rank of the person they were briefing. It gave them courage to speak truth, to power, to contradict a flawed plan, to be the quiet voice of reason in a room full of loud, confident, and incorrect assumptions. Dr. Eris Thorne was never seen at that base again. She remained a ghost, a name in a file few would ever see. Her work continued in the shadows, in other JOCs, in other crises, her victories silent, her name unknown to the men and women whose lives she saved. Her legacy was not in medals or public recognition, which she would have undoubtedly shunned. Her legacy was in the changed mind of a single major, a lesson that propagated through the ranks, becoming a new, stronger strain of institutional wisdom. It was in the quiet confidence of a young analyst who, remembering the story, dared to challenge a colonel's flawed assumption. It was in a general who chose to listen to a civilian specialist over his own decorated staff. Her legacy wasn't a monument of stone or bronze. It was a living, evolving idea. That competence is the only currency that truly matters when lives are on the line. The world is full of noise. People clamoring for attention, for credit, for validation. They build their identities on titles, on ranks, on superficial markers of authority. They believe that power is something you wear, something you announce. But true power, the kind that can change the course of a battle with a single keystroke, is quiet. It is forged in years of silent, disciplined study. It is honed in relentless pursuit of mastery. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to demand respect. It simply is.
And when it is revealed, when that quiet competence is brought to bear on a moment of crisis, it silences the noise. It humbles the arrogant. It reminds us all that what you do will always be more important than what you say you are. The greatest strength is not the ability to command, but the ability to know and the quiet discipline to act on that knowledge at the precise moment it is needed most. That is the path of the quiet professional. That is the legacy of Dr. Thorne.